following on from a second consecutive loss to Leon Edwards. With talk of having shot knees and no fights booked, many MMA fans were writing Kamaru Usman off as someone who would ever again become a serious contender. In the space of around 24 hours, this has now dramatically changed, with Paulo Costa pulling out of his fight with Khamzat Chimaev, and with Usman holding a winning record against the champion of the division. If you're going to make a case for Usman winning this fight, the first place you would look is his fight against Gilbert Burns. After a dodgy start for Usman, in the second and third rounds his jab took over, with the finish eventually coming from a jab. In contrast, as is well known, Chimaev was in a war with Burns, with many fans thinking a string of right hands from Burns late in the third round should have turned the decision in his favour. That said, at this point on balance, you would have to say that the momentum favours Chimaev. To look at Usman's first potential method of victory, in some key fights, you could argue he has weaponised his cardio and implemented a wall and stool style game plan. The choice of words is debatable here, as he's not been completely passive in these fights, or necessarily afraid of his opponents at striking range or on the ground. That said, he has appeared keen to wear on his opponents, without taking too many chances. Some people would argue that as Chimaev got very tired against Gilbert Burns, Usman could use a similar style tactic to win a decision here. Personally, I think this is unlikely. Though Chimaev has mainly gone for leg attacks in his MMA career, he grew up in the Russian wrestling system, where wrestlers learn gymnastics as they are learning wrestling. The point is not about leg power, it's more about creativity and overall body control. Plus, as a stereotype, Russian wrestlers, even if they don't have a sambo background, they tend to be more comfortable in the tie-up and upper body wrestling exchanges. That being said, that's not to sleep on Usman's wrestling, as he actually tried to make the Olympics himself at one stage, and had coaches backing him, but he got sidetracked through injuries. Personally, I think if the fight becomes a wrestling match, I am expecting more dynamic wrestling exchanges and not a grinding style scenario, though it's hard to predict what techniques exactly each fighter will use. To look at the striking in this fight, I think it would be fair to say that Usman is the more measured and technical striker. Therefore, you could make a case for him approaching this fight as a striker the way he successfully did against Gilbert Burns and Colby Covington. Personally, I think it would be a mistake for Usman to try and implement some kind of sprawl and brawl game plan here. Chimaev's tendency of taking reckless swings, sometimes successfully, sometimes not, should eventually make it very hard for Usman to see the shots coming. Whilst a sharp counter-striker could use Chimaev's aggression against him, I don't think Usman's striking advantage is that significant. Considering his skill set, I think the best strategy here for Usman would be to duck under the punches and try to put Chimaev on his back. Whilst Chimaev's takedown defense is likely formidable in a freestyle wrestling context, if Usman can catch him planting his feet to throw a bomb, he will be significantly easier to take down. On the ground, this is technically a BJJ black belt in Usman against a BJJ purple belt in Chimaev. Despite these credentials, I don't think anyone expects either of these two to show much off their back. It wouldn't be surprising to see either of these guys tee off from the guard as if it were the mount position. Overall, I would make Chimaev a slight favourite going into this fight. Even though Usman has a better performance against a common opponent, I think the momentum and self-confidence favours Chimaev at this point, considering the way Usman looked hesitant in his last fight. I will say though that I believe if Usman wins, he will start to become recognised as one of the GOATs of MMA, rather than just a guy who was world champion for a couple of years. If Chimaev wins, he will be recognised as the champion in waiting.